A massive BlackRock Bitcoin warning is coming out right now. The Bitcoin price could be cut in half here, could be split. Yes, you heard that right. But the whole thing is different than you think. There are viral clips going around now, including from Samson Mow, which we absolutely have to take a look at. We have new massive purchases from Metaplanet and others. We have Jack Dorsey, who is now preparing for the Bitcoin standard. The banks are now all pouring into Bitcoin, and he's getting ready for it. We'll take a look at exactly how. And not only do we have the BlackRock warning, but now there's also a warning coming from none other than Jim Cramer about a financial Armageddon. Tough word. About a financial Armageddon that's heading our way. And Bitcoin could, in this Armageddon, in this tough word, in this Armageddon, Bitcoin could be the big winner. So make sure to stick around. Smash the like button below for higher Bitcoin prices, for new all-time highs. Bitcoin is just below the $119,000 mark. We're not far from new all-time highs, and we could definitely hit new all-time highs this week. So make sure to hit the like button below right now. We can also see it clearly here. Adam Beck is giving us a reminder. Don't make me tap the sign. Bitcoin is the hurdle rate here, with the Simpson meme. So he's reminding us of what I often tell you here. Bitcoin is the benchmark, the comparison investment, the risk-free investment. You always have to ask yourself, whenever you throw money into something, can you beat Bitcoin with it or not? If you can beat Bitcoin with it, okay, then the investment is potentially praiseworthy. And if not, then just put your money into Bitcoin, because Bitcoin gives you the highest return with the least effort and the lowest risk. Of course, this is an investment advice, but more and more people are realizing this, including Adam Beck, who was already mentioned by Satoshi Nakamoto in the white paper. Then, if we keep going here, we now have massive purchases. Check this out. Here, Metaplanet is buying another 500 Bitcoin, 518 Bitcoin, and Smart Web Company is buying another 295 Bitcoin. And we're also seeing these smaller treasury companies like Smart Web Company and so on. They're also dealing with increasingly larger amounts. Some of them are already reaching the point where they're buying around 1,000 Bitcoin per week or so. And of course, that's really, really positive to see. And before we get to Jack Dorsey and all those stories, let's actually bring in the BlackRock warning here. Why the price could be cut in half, why the price could split here. And like I said, this is different from what most people think, because Samson Mow from Gen 3 is warning here about a split. So a division, or halving is probably the wrong term. But I think division is actually the more accurate term, a division of the Bitcoin price. And that doesn't mean that the Bitcoin price is going to split, and instead of 100,000 US dollars, we'll only have a 50,000 US dollar Bitcoin price. No, what this is about is that we basically have two types of Bitcoin prices. On one hand, the official Bitcoin price, where ETFs are traded, where, for example, Bitcoin might also be traded on exchanges, BlackRock ETFs, of course also ARK ETFs, Fidelity ETFs, and so on. And then there's the free float ETF, for example, ETFs that are sent peer-to-peer, ETFs that aren't sold on exchanges, ETFs that don't exist through an ETF wrapper or anything like that. And that's nothing new here either. So of course, maybe it's new here that people are talking about it. But I've discussed this with others before, that there will be different types of prices, and that the fungibility of Bitcoin will be somewhat divided. But let's just listen directly to what Samsung has to say about this.
Tweeted about Bitcoin being split, bifurcated into approved Bitcoin. The Bitcoin is in ETFs and in funds versus free Bitcoin, which is the self-custodied, freely circulating Bitcoin outside of the control of institutions. And I think that possibility is still there. We'll see how it plays out for sure. But I don't see Bitcoin possibly being captured because Bitcoin will always exist outside the system. Bitcoin within the system, within the financial system, is an arbitrary construct. But the natural state of Bitcoin is free flowing outside of anyone's control. And I don't think that will change at any time. You might have a good portion of Bitcoin locked up in ETFs and whatnot, or in nation state treasuries, but you also have a good portion not in treasuries. So I don't see it as an existential risk. There could be this separation in the future, but then you'll just have two different prices for Bitcoin, just like Argentina has two different prices for the dollar blue, and then the official dollar rate.
And that's a very, very interesting concept. But Samson Mow also immediately says here, hey, this isn't going to break Bitcoin. It can't just be like the Argentine dollar, where there's the blue dollar and the other dollar, and then you have the officially traded Bitcoin, which might cost less, and the unofficial Bitcoin, which then costs more. That's already partly the case now. There are KYC Bitcoins, the ones that are somehow in the KYC cycle, meaning they're no longer anonymous, and there are no KYC Bitcoins. And if you buy no KYC Bitcoin, it's usually always 3 or 4% more expensive than if you buy KYC Bitcoin. So actually, there are already two prices now, but it's not really official yet, more like unofficial. And if you look even more closely, there actually isn't just a single price, but rather 1,000 million prices, because every exchange has its own price. Kraken has a different price than 21 Bitcoin. 21 Bitcoin has a different price than Coinbase. Coinbase has a different price than Börse Stuttgart, and so on. There isn't one Bitcoin price. In reality, there are millions of Bitcoin prices. The thing is, arbitrage traders constantly adjust the differences between these Bitcoin prices through arbitrage trading. That's why it feels like there's just one single Bitcoin price. But if you look really closely, there are always small arbitrage windows where, for example, the price is a bit higher on one exchange compared to another, and so on. But thanks to arbitrageurs, all of this gets balanced out and adjusted again. What was also interesting was what Jack Dorsey is doing here. A new announcement just came in. Hey, so the billionaire and CEO of Block is announcing a complete package of Bitcoin banking services for small businesses here. Yeah, to establish that. That means the Bitcoin standard is being prepared here. These companies can then operate here according to the Bitcoin standard. If you ask me, this is definitely a positive development. More and more banks, more and more institutional players are opening up to Bitcoin. And yeah, you can see it as good or bad. And of course there's criticism. The Bitcoin space is splitting this and that. But that's just how it is. When Bitcoin matures, when Bitcoin continues to gain traction, more institutional investors, more big players, and so on will come to Bitcoin. And now check this out. Jim Cramer, who is often seen as a contrarian indicator, is talking about an Armageddon coming our way and Bitcoin as the big winner.
Jim, Bitcoin's on the move today. A lot of the crypto stocks as well. We're not quite back to 123K.
Right.
We're close.
It just continues to be, anytime you ever hear about what size the deficit is, or David, you know that the trillions of dollars and the interest has made a lot of younger people feel, this and Ethereum are a better place to be. I'm a huge believer in this, by the way, because I have very little faith that we're going to be able to grow our way out of. I cannot think about how we're going to grow our way out of our situation yet. Maybe.
You mean our debt to GDP?
Yeah, I've not been able to figure out a way. So it's a great hedge against the.
It conceivably is. But if there's financial Armageddon, Bitcoin hangs in there, you think?
Yeah, I do.
Here, the last question was the really crucial one. Answered very simply here. If there's financial Armageddon here, do you think Bitcoin will prevail? And he makes it very clear here. Yes, he brings up the US debt to GDP, meaning debt in relation to gross domestic product, and that you can't just get rid of this debt, that you can't just grow your way out of this debt mess, which some people still believe, but which I think is completely unrealistic. And even with Bitcoin, it's hard to just grow your way out of it. Cynthia Lummis is proposing to buy 1 million Bitcoin here to pay off the debt. I think even that is going to be very, very difficult. Unless you really start it today or tomorrow. Man, there's this fly buzzing around here all the time. Man, unless you actually started today or tomorrow to seriously buy up Bitcoin. So here's the next warning. But this time it's actually a reverse warning. Not about Bitcoin, but about the fiat system. And I think that's the much more relevant warning before anything even happens with Bitcoin. And of course, things could happen, like the price getting pegged or something like that. But the really, really, really risky thing is not having any Bitcoin these days. And that's exactly what Samson Mow is making very, very clear here again with his latest Bitcoin price prediction. Why Bitcoin is about to break through in a big way and why it could be a really bad idea not to bet on Bitcoin right now.
As Bitcoin becomes the new world reserve asset, the price will go up. It'll go to 1 million, it'll go to 10, and then it'll reach dollar sat parity. And probably before that happens, we hit a terminus point where, you stop pricing things in dollars because it doesn't make sense anymore. And there's tons of historical examples of this, right? Like fast failure of fiat currencies is the norm. It's not the exception. Look at the German mark, right? That's fast fail. Every fiat currency fast fails. It doesn't fail over 50 to 100 years. Except for maybe the dollar. It's failed over 100 years, but it's coming to a close. But as it increases in value, then of course you see less volatility because it takes more to make a dent. If you go back to, I think last year, right, the Saxony government in Germany, they dumped 50,000. And that made a bigger impact than the 80,000. So you can already see in a very short time frame a far more muted effect of coins being dropped.
And this scenario being described here is really, really fascinating. It doesn't have to be 100% certain that it'll happen this way. But Samson Mow is talking here about Bitcoin going to 1 million, then to 10 million. At some point, there will be sat dollar parity, meaning 1 Satoshi. 1 Bitcoin is actually divisible into 100 million Satoshis, which means that's the subunit, the small unit of Bitcoin. Then basically, $1 will correspond to 1 Satoshi. And then the whole system here won't collapse slowly, but the entire system will collapse very, very quickly. The Armageddon that Jim Cramer was just talking about. He says that if you look at history, it was always a very, very rapid collapse. He compares it here to the Weimar Republic. But he also says that in this process, Bitcoin keeps getting stronger. For example, here's a comparison. Back when Germany sold 50,000 Bitcoin, it moved the price more than now, when 80,000 Bitcoin are being moved. On the one hand, that's because the market capitalization is larger. On the other hand, it's also because news like this doesn't really move the market as much anymore, since by now we've heard this kind of news so many times. They're selling, the US is selling, Germany is selling, the UAE is selling, and so on. At some point, I'd say, it just doesn't move the markets anymore, because often the initial shock of the news causes much more rapid and massive price drops than the actual sale itself. That means Bitcoin is now so big that, in theory, it could even withstand the sale of 100,000 Bitcoin per day. So even these kinds of FUD arguments, like if Satoshi sells his Bitcoin, he still has 1 million Bitcoin. Even if we assume Satoshi were to sell that 1 million Bitcoin, he wouldn't do it all in one day. He wouldn't do it in a single day, because that would create slippage. He would spread it out over 1 or 2 weeks. And even if he were to sell that 1 million Bitcoin over a week or two, yeah, okay, maybe the price would drop by 5 or 10,000 US dollars. But I don't really believe in those doomsday scenarios like people used to. Satoshi sells his coins and the Bitcoin price drops by 80% or something like that. I just don't believe in things like that anymore. That might have been possible in the past, but not anymore. That's why Bitcoin has established itself. Yeah, some pretty bold statements here. Let me know down below how you see things. If you still want to buy Bitcoin, I'll put a link down below to 21 Bitcoin, where you can easily and securely buy Bitcoin. With the code Bitcoin Hotel, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. Definitely check it out, and I'll see you guys. See you then, peace out.